Hey guys, welcome to the Generational Guardians podcast. And today we are going to be talking about how to spot signs of possible aspiration or swallowing problems in your aging parent. And this is super important, so you might want to hang around until the end, because at the end I'm going to tell you the therapy technique I used from 2001 until I left the adult care population that worked 99.9% of the time. So hang around for that. Another reason that you might want to hang around with us today is because aspiration, which is when food or liquid enters into the airway and gets into the lungs, can cause a lot of different things. It can cause them to be malnourished. It can cause dehydration, but it can also cause pneumonia, which can in turn lead to death. So aspiration is a really serious issue in the adult population, or, people over 65. It's a big deal. So I want to talk to you about what are some of those signs so that you can be aware. I think sometimes, especially with silent aspirators, and we'll talk about that in a minute, that sometimes things are happening and we don't even notice because we're in it. We're just in the thick of it. And sometimes you just don't see the smaller things. Not that it's small, but when I get to the signs and symptoms of silent aspiration, you'll know what I mean when I say that. So the number one, which is probably the most obvious to all of us, is coughing and choking. So if they're coughing or choking during a meal or after a meal, this could be an indicator they have some oropharyngeal weakness, and they either could be penetrating or aspirating. And the difference between the two, let me just share that with you real quickly, is if they're penetrating liquids or food, that means it spills over the base of the tongue and it goes to the level of the vocal cords, but it doesn't go beneath the cords. If you aspirate, then it goes beneath the level of the cords, and that's when you're in trouble. We don't want them having penetration, but if they sense it and can cough it up and swallow safely afterward, which a lot of people can do because they still have some sensation, then they're safe from getting pneumonia. But if it is not addressed, the weakness is not addressed, then it can lead to pneumonia for sure. Number two, a delayed swallow. So if you notice during mealtime, there's just a little bit of a delay. Sometimes there's a long delay, but by the point it's a long delay, typically it's been addressed. Like we know there's a problem and we're trying to do something to correct it. So take note of that. Maybe they hold liquid in their mouth, and it's almost like they're tongue pumping. They're trying to work it to the back so they can swallow, but it takes a little bit. Kind of like my granny would talk about priming the pump. They used to, get water from a pump out back. Their tongue, it's like they're priming the oral cavity so they can push that bolus down safely. So that's number two. Number three, frequent throat clearing. So if they're just, like that, just clearing the throat, and especially if you notice it after a meal, that's a red flag as well. Another one is regurgitation of food. Now, I will say, I worked with the adult population as a speech language pathologist I've been a therapist for 32 years, but I would say 23, 25 years with adults. And the swallowing problem area, that's my jam, dysphagia. And so I only have one patient that had that issue. And if it's a regurgitation issue, typically that's a esophageal issue, which is not my role. Typically we're oropharyngeal. That's, we pass that on to someone else. But that could be another sign that they're struggling and having some issues. Change in their voice quality, that's another one. So maybe they sound wet or gurgly after they eat or drink or during the meal. Could even sound hoarse. And again, as I mentioned before, some patients that are penetrating will sound wet and gurgly, but they're able to clear their throat, swallow, and then if you had them say ah and it's clear, then they were able to safely kind of project it up and then be able to swallow the bolus without aspirating it. Penetration is not good either, but that is better than aspirating. So let's just kind of keep that in our minds. So again, aspiration can lead to pneumonia. Let's talk about silent aspiration just for a minute. So again, if someone is silently aspirating, we may not even know that it's happening. So what are some signs? A little drippy nose while they're eating or drinking. They got a little sniff. You see a little clear liquid coming out of their nose, that could be a indication. Watery eyes, that's another one. Or maybe they sneeze during the meal. This could be another sign they're having some issues. Maybe they breathe faster while they're eating. So those are just a few things. Or if you hear some wheezing. But I think the two main ones are the runny, drippy nose and the low-grade temp. Well, I guess three. And the watery eyes. So those are the three main ones that I always kind of ask people about. And of course, if you notice anything else, tell your PCP, which we'll talk about in a minute. But another indicator that they may be aspirating or having trouble eating is unintentional weight loss. They're not setting out to lose weight. They're just losing weight. A lot of times when they're older and they know they're having some issues, but they don't want to tell anyone, so they just don't eat, or they eat very little, and they can lose weight before we can turn around and whistle Dixie. It happens so fast. So we want to keep an eye on that too. Keep an eye on their weight status. If they live alone or if they're in assisted living or if they live with you, it doesn't matter. This can happen at any time, because with generalized weakness, just maybe there's nothing in particular that's happening that you're aware of. They're just declining. That could be a big deal, losing weight. So it's important to note, these things with your parents, because if you notice these things, what you want to do is go to their primary care physician and say, hey, look, mom and dad are having A, B, and C while they're eating and drinking, and we are worried that this could lead to more issues, and we don't want that. So what do we need to do? And listen to what they say. And if they don't say we need to have a referral to have a comprehensive assessment of their swallowing, then you ask for a referral. And typically, PCPs will give you one because they're like, yeah, we probably need to look at that. So they're on your team on that one typically. But for whatever reason, if they don't offer that, do not leave without one. Just tell them, hey, we need a referral. And they will either send you to an ENT, an otolaryngologist, but more likely than not, you will end up with a speech-language pathologist performing one of the tests that are available to assess that, to do a complete and full assessment. And watching our parents, when they're having difficulty, I did, like I said, for years, I worked with people who had swallowing issues, and it's so sad to watch that, because that's, as human beings, we're social creatures. We like to have a little something when we're talking to the neighbor. We have someone over for lunch, or even if you're at a skilled facility, what's left? How you interact with others, the relationships, and food, having snacks and being able to enjoy your lunch and all those things that we want our older population to be able to do without being fearful and without getting pneumonia and possibly passing because of it. So we want to catch it as soon as possible. Now, I'm going to share with you later, again, one of the things that I did for years that really helped my patients. But we'll get into that in just a little bit. So once you go to the PCP, they've given you the orders. Let's say you end up with a speech pathologist. There are two types of assessments that I'm going to talk about today. Well, let me back it up a little bit. Let's back up a minute. So let's say your parent's in the hospital, you notice they're having issues, and you say, hey, Miss Nurse or Mr. Nurse, because those are typically the people you see the most. Mom's coughing on her liquids, or dad's choking on his potatoes, whatever the case may be. Can we get someone to look at that? Typically what happens is they write an order in the chart for a speech pathologist to come in and do a bedside swallow. And what they'll do is they'll come in and they'll look at all kinds of things. Some of the things that I already mentioned, they will be looking at. Do they have a wet voice, a gurgly voice? Are they able to clear that? Do they have a delayed swallow? Do they have more trouble with liquids, thick or thin? What consistency? They'll look at different food consistencies, and they will determine, based on that bedside assessment, how to move forward. And typically, if anyone has trouble with any of those, most of the time, especially if they're older and already in acute care, they will go ahead and recommend a modified. So that's the next step. What happens? So you could have a modified barium swallow study, or you could have a FEES, which is a fiber optic endoscopic evaluation of swallowing, which I love. I have done both of those. When I worked at a rehab hospital, what I did the modified barium swallows. I was able to get privileges at the acute care facility up the street, because anytime we would send patients over there, it would take sometimes several days to get the report back. We didn't always get a report back very quickly. And when you're talking about someone with swallowing problems, and we're talking about aspirating or penetrating, and this could lead to bigger issues, then how can we get that report faster? So I was trained, and then I was able to get my privileges, and I would go with the patients. And one of I would say the negatives about modified barium swallows, and I'm not saying don't get one, they're available, probably more than FEES are available, and they both give you the same result. It's just how they get there. So the modified barium swallow study, your family member is exposed to radiation, because the speech path and the radiologist are working together in tandem. He's taking the pictures while the speech path person is administering the test. And so their radiation, barium, they have to have barium, and oftentimes with older people, that can cause constipation, which leads to issues. So if you ever have a parent that you do take for a modified barium swallow, make sure they drink plenty of fluids afterwards so they don't have an issue with that. Plus, for us, and this is not always the case, but for us, we were a rehab, they were acute care. So if we were there, let's say with the patient at 8 in the morning, and something happened and it was 9, 10, sometimes we sit there 3 or 4 hours waiting on our turn. They're exhausted. We get in there, they probably are not going to do as well. And then by the time we get back to our hospital, what would always happen is they were exhausted, and they were like, I'm done. I'm not doing any therapy today. So it was like they lost a whole day. But we did get the report that day because I did it. And so I would write the report. Typically, the radiologist would extract information from my report. And so there's 2 reports, but the main report is the speech language pathologist. That's who you want to talk to, because that person will have the recommendations that will lead to the safest possible way for your person, your aging parent, to eat or drink. So let's talk about that just for a minute. So what might they recommend? Well, one thing that they may recommend is a diet change. They may say, well, they need to be on a puree diet right now because they could not handle the solids. They may say, oh, they need to be on thickened liquids again because they can't control the bolus. So let's put on the thin, so let's give them thick. So there's just different things, different consistencies. Take 2 small bites and then a drink. They may suggest a chin tuck, which just really helps when they take a bite. They tuck their chin, and it's just kind of another little extra layer of protection for the airway. So they're going to tell you all these things, and then they can make a recommendation for treatment. So always ask questions, whomever you're talking to, the doctor, the radiologist, which typically I don't think the radiologist speaks to people. I could be wrong. I know when I worked at acute care, they did not talk to the patient's family or the patient. That was always me. And ask them questions. Ask that speech pathologist, so what are the plans? Who's going to be working? Who are you referring us to? Because they could refer you. If it's an outpatient situation, you could do home health. You could go to a day program if there's one available to you. There's multiple places that could provide that service. Outpatient clinic. And if you're already in acute care, then they will just start treatment there. What that looks like, it just depends on the person doing the treatment. And so let's talk just for a minute about treatment. what are some options? Well, one is, I would call it traditional therapy. Just, oral exercises, maybe some effortful swallows, those kinds of things. That's traditional. It's something that you learned in graduate school, and it can provide some benefit, but I would say that was my least favorite. Number two would be electrical stim, vital stim. So they place electrodes on specific places to put sensory stim into the muscles for swallowing. And I mean, that sounds great. I'm for anything that helps the patient. I'm 100% for anything that helps the patient. The one that I loved, that I took the course in 2001, it was called DPNS, Deep Pharyngeal Neuromuscular Stimulation. And the lady that taught that course was very smart, but wow, she was high energy, tense, intense, in your face. Like if you didn't raise your hand, you're the one she's going to call on. That kind of person. You know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm talking about. And, she had a helper named Pamela, and I'll never forget it. Pamela! I mean, she treated that poor girl like dirt. Or that's how we perceived it. I'm sure Pamela didn't feel that way, but that's how we perceived it. And I will tell you something about that course. It changed forever how I treated my patients. It changed the course of the results of my patient and how fast we got the results, going from peg tubes to regular food. So I love that. I love DPNS. Patient just has to open their mouth. I do everything else. And we'll talk a little bit more about it in just a minute. But I wanted to share, when we know better, we do better. And when I was doing some research just to kind of refresh myself, I was doing a little research, and I saw in 2012, it was in a speech path community online, that a young speech path asked the question, what do you think about vital stim and DPNS? I'm really looking for something for my patients that really works. And a lady responded who was also a speech path PhD, so remember that research. And basically the lady said, it's not going to harm them, but it's probably going to waste their time. Okay. Because there's no research to prove that it works. So I'm just guessing this lady's never, ever had gone to a conference on DPNS. She's never done DPNS. Probably has never spoken to anyone that knew how to do DPNS. Because I'm telling you right now, I'm looking you right in the eye, 99.9% of the time it worked for me. I have one guy, and he had excessive mucus. So it really wasn't DPNS's fault. I couldn't do what I needed to because he had so much mucus and it was so thick. I'd never seen anything like it. He was the only one. Everybody else, life-changing. And I'm talking about hundreds of patients. So I'm not talking about just one or two. So my recommendation would be maybe ask someone who's been doing DPNS and get their input before we just give some answer, that keeps someone else from going that direction. And the woman said, and I'm not trashing this lady. I'm just making a point here that you have to do your own research, and that's us as therapists as well that provide that service to these aging people. We want to provide the best thing possible. And in her mind, effortful swallows, and I think the term she used was strong exercises. What does that even mean? So if I feel like she was talking about effortful swallows and the traditional way to do oral, pharyngeal exercises, which is fine. Again, that's fine. But don't talk about something that you don't sound like you have a real clue about, because I'm telling you, I changed lives. It's nothing I did. It was that conference that taught me what to do, and all that patient had to do was open their mouth. I had a lemon glycerin swab, and I would simulate certain areas in the oral cavity, and it would put like sensory information into those muscles to help it to regain strength. So if you have a family member, please, go ask for someone. Say, does anybody know how to do DPNS? If they don't, then try to find someone that does the vital stem. Those are the two ones that I would go after, but I would go for vital stem first. And her whole point about the research, well, I did research. It just didn't get printed in a fancy journal, okay? Hundreds of patients. It was so crazy. Let me give you a couple of examples. So I had the very first patient that I did it on was the cutest little old man. He had white hair, beautiful white hair. He wore these beautiful little polyester outfits, dressed to the nines, so cute and sweet. Peg tube, he couldn't eat. And so I talked to him. I said, hey, listen, I just went to this conference and this is what I need to do. I would love to try it on you. Are you open to it? Because I said, I don't want to try any other types of treatments for your swallowing except for this. Let's see if it works. Are you on board? And he said, I'm on board. Let's do it. And so I said, well, what's your long-term goal? What is the end result that you want to do our last day of therapy? And he said, I want to eat fried chicken. Hey, I'm telling you, he's from the South. He asked for chicken, and I already thought he looked like Colonel Sanders. So I'm like, for sure, you are going to have some Colonel Sanders extra crispy, okay? And I will bring it to you personally, and we will eat it together. So we worked together for multiple weeks. I don't know, 4 to 6 weeks, probably 6. And we did that for about 45 minutes for 3 days a week. And 6 to 8 weeks, no more than 8 weeks. It's been a minute, okay? It's 2001. But I could tell you this, he went out for his swallow study because at that time, I sent him out because I didn't want to do it. I wanted someone else to do it. I wanted those results to say, I didn't want anyone to think Pam skewed those, you know what I mean? So he went out, came back, passed it, could eat regular food and drink thin liquids. The man was not eating by mouth at all, anything. Medicines went through his tube. We had some fried chicken the last day of therapy. That's life-changing. It was on like Donkey Kong when I realized, hey, this works. This really works. That lady was not just tooting her own horn. So after a while, I decided, you know what? I think I could best serve some people in the skilled facilities. Because again, you're stuck in a nursing home. There's not a lot to do. And eating is just a pleasure in life, And so I left the rehab and went to a skilled facility, but it was through a company. So I had 2 facilities. And this one facility, I went in, and for 2 weeks, I would go to the breakfast group. Everybody's coughing, sneezing, blowing their nose because it's running out of their nose. Obviously, either aspirating, penetrating, they have problems, okay? Nobody would give me a referral. Nobody would write orders for me to see these people. 2 weeks, I put up with that. And the nurses were just ugly to me. They were not nice at all. And they weren't even nasty nice. They were just nasty. And I finally went to the administrator. And I don't know if you've ever dealt with administrators at nursing facilities. I'm sure there are some good ones. But the ones that I've always dealt with are a little sketch. But that's just my opinion. And this lady was really no different. But what she said, I took it personally. Because she said, well, the reason I'm not giving you or they're not giving you any orders is because all the speech people in the past never did anything with the patients. We never saw any positive results. So I took that personally, and I told her, give me your worst patient, and I will show you what I could do. Can't help what they did or didn't do, but I can show you what I can do. I can help these people with the swallowing problems. So she gave me literally the worst one. I thought the lady was going to die every day I worked with her. I prayed, please do not let this woman die while I'm in here. That's how bad off this lady was. She had a peg tube. She was aphasic, couldn't talk, emaciated, just a little old frail thing, so sweet. She watched The Bold and Beautiful every day when I was doing her therapy. So for 8 weeks, we worked together. And after the 8 weeks, she went out for her swallow study, came back. She could eat regular food and had regular liquids. And let me tell you, I could not knock the patients off of me because they were just crazy handing me this one and that one because they saw what I said. I backed it up with actions. DPNS works. That's what I'm saying. I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I'm tooting it for DPNS. Beep, beep, toot, toot. It works. And that was just the beginning of knowing that I could truly impact someone's life. And I helped a lot of people at that facility. And when I left, the interesting thing is one of the nurses that was probably the nastiest to me gave my number to her mom because I left there and went to acute care. And she called me. This lady's mother called me and said, hey, so-and-so said if I'm going to correct my swallowing issues, I need to talk to Pam because she's the only one that can correct it. And we got together. She came to the outpatient, and I saw her at the hospital, helped her with her issue. She was fine afterward as well. So if you have an aging parent, I would highly recommend DPNS. I don't care if there's research, scientific studies, 22, 3, 5, I don't know how many years from 2001 to whatever today is. It works. And don't be bullied into doing something that you say, well, hey, I know this really doesn't work as well. I'd rather try this. Is there anyone available? And there may not be anyone available. I mean, that just is what it is. But ask. I would totally ask. A couple of other things that I want to talk to you guys about before we close this today is it's important as well. So like maybe they change their diet. It's a pureed thickened liquids. Purees like baby food. Maybe they're on a mechanical soft, or that's what we called it at the time when I worked at the rehab hospital and even in acute care. And that was where the meats are ground with gravy and then everything else is regular. So, you may have to make some changes if they're living with you. If they're at a skilled facility, they'll make those changes for them. But if they live anywhere else, someone else will have to do that for them. And there may be things they need to do with their medications. Sometimes they want their medications crushed and put in applesauce or pudding. It just depends. There's just different things that they may recommend. 2 things I want to tell you. If you have a parent, especially if they live with you or live alone, but I think it's vitally important. 2 questions here. After they eat a meal, how long should they sit up? If we know they're having swallowing problems or aspirating, how long should they sit up? At least 45 minutes. And if they want to lie down for a while, they need to wait that long. And they need to have the head of their bed elevated 35, 45 degrees. So if they don't have a hospital bed, then what you can do is you can buy what are they called? The little shapes that elevates the head. I can't recall the name of it right now, but you can buy those online and put their pillows on that, and it elevates them. Because what happens is you have 2 vallecula and 2 piriform sinuses. And if you have weakness and things are spilling over the base of the tongue, then they can spill over into your vallecula. You have, like I said, you have a left and a right one, and then they can go in. They can also spill over, depending on how much weakness you have, into your piriform sinuses. So just think about having 2 cups of water, and if you were to lie back on your bed, what would happen to the water? It's all going to spill out. Same idea. So that's why you want them to sit up for 45 minutes, even an hour, so they could continue to swallow, do those dry swallows, and get all of that. If there's any in there, get it out. And then additionally, have that head of the bed elevated, so it just gives them more time to clear those things out if something is in there. Because if they go flat on their back, it can spill over the base of the tongue. I'm sorry, not over the base of the tongue. It can spill out of the vallecula, and they could aspirate that as well. So we just do not want them aspirating. Now, when I was younger, I was black and white. I was very, wow, you have to follow these rules. This is because if you don't, this is what happens. And when I was probably 3 or 4 years into being a speech path at the rehab hospital, I had a family say, well, you know what, Mom is 93, and we've decided she wants to eat and drink what she wants. So that's, we're going to do that. And, that just helped me to shift my thinking a little bit. And I was older, and of course I respected that. But up until then, I'm like, these are the things you need to do. And I was just horrified if someone didn't do it because I didn't want them to get pneumonia and possibly die as a result. And so just know that as your parents age, if there's an age that, let's say they tell you when I'm in my 90s, and this is why you need to have these conversations early. We've talked about that in another episode. What do they want? Do you want a peg tube? Do you want to have all these modifications to your diet? Or do you just want to eat what you want and, let the chips fall where they may, for lack of a better term? So I hope this was helpful to you guys. I think it's super important to think about their swallowing as they age, because that is an issue for a lot of people, unfortunately. Strokes. People have strokes, Parkinson's, MS, all the things that cause weakness, or just overall as people age and they do less things. Another reason to encourage your parents to eat more protein and do resistance type exercises to stay strong and build, maintain the muscle, continue to build. We want them to not decline, but unfortunately that's not always the case. And with just even generalized weakness, people can have difficulty with their swallowing, because this is a muscle too, right? They're all muscles, and they're either strong or they're weak. And that's one reason I love DPNS, because just like stroke patients with the OT would move the arm, and the OT they're putting sensory input basically into the muscle. And one day the brain and the muscle say, hey, I remember you. We need to work together. Same thing. We put the sensory stem in, and then the muscle gets stronger, and you begin to see tongue grooving, soft palates elevating and retracting. You start seeing the things that you want to see that indicate, okay, they're making progress. This is amazing. So I hope this was beneficial to you guys. I have some people that are coming on that are going to be hanging out with us, giving us some great information that hopefully will help you and help our community as we grow. So I'm super excited about that. And I have a couple of things in the works as well I'll be sharing with you in the future. So I hope you guys have a great day. And remember, try and enjoy the journey, guys. And we will see you in the next one.